Hi, I'm Joe Landry, and this is a presentation about the history of Franklin, decade by decade. In this video, we'll look back at the 1870s and explore the events that happened during that time period. The sources of information that will be discussed in this presentation were taken from such places as the Franklin Register, which was the town's first newspaper, and the Franklin Sentinel, which replaced it. The pictures were taken from the Stanley Chilsen collection and the Sanborn fire insurance maps, as well as my own personal pictures and postcards. In addition, I would like to give a special word of thanks to Rebecca Finnegan and the staff at the Franklin Historical Museum for their assistance. The Franklin Historical Museum's website is shown here, where you will find links to Facebook and Instagram. This is a view of the downtown area as taken from the 1879 drawing of Franklin. As the drawing shows, the downtown area did not have large business blocks at that time, other than the Ray Block on the corner of Depot Street and Main Street. Instead, it was made up of many small buildings and houses. Before we begin our discussion on the 1870s, there are a few items that happened before the 1870s that should be highlighted. This is the School Street School, which was Franklin's first high school. It was located near the intersection of School Street and Union Street. At the annual town meeting in April of 1868, the new high school was established by vote. The school opened on May 20th, 1868, with Miss Mary A. Bryant of Stoneham as the principal. Dean Academy was first established by Dr. Oliver Dean in 1865 on Main Street. This is the first Dean Hall, which was completed in 1868. It burnt to the ground in 1872 and was replaced with the Dean Hall that stands there today. Here is a picture of downtown Franklin that was taken between 1868 and 1872. This time frame is established because the cupola on top of the first Dean Hall is seen in the picture, as pointed out by the red arrow. The first Dean Hall was constructed in 1868 and was destroyed by fire in 1872. The blue arrow points to the steeple on the first Grace Universalist Church, which was located on Main Street directly across from today's Ray Memorial Library. That church would be moved to a new location on School Street in 1874 and would become the Baptist Church. The James M. Stewart Block. This is the James M. Stewart Block as it appeared in the early 1900s. The buildings on this block were constructed before the 1870s. This detail was taken from a map of the town of Franklin during 1876. The red arrow points to the James M. Stewart Block. The Chilsen Block. This is the Chilsen Block, which was constructed in 1870 by James O. Chilsen. It was located on Main Street beside the A. Fletcher Block and directly across from today's post office. The Central House. Here is an artist's drawing of the Central House, which was constructed in the early 1870s at the corner of Main Street and School Street. It was destroyed by fire in 1886. Today, the Ray Memorial Library is located there. The Haywood Mill. In 1872, the first factory that manufactured felt goods was built on Union Street at Nason's Crossing and was known as Ray, Rathburn and Mackenzie. In 1880, Ray and Rathburn withdrew from the company, and Charles Mackenzie became the sole owner. At that point, he changed the machinery so that it would produce satinet. He carried on the business until his death in 1891, when Harry T. Haywood took over the mill and renamed it Haywood Mill. Mr. Haywood added a north wing to the building in 1895 and an east wing in 1913. Today, this building is the location of the Franklin Mill Store. The first Ray Block. The first Ray Block in downtown Franklin was completed in 1872. It was located on Main Street between today's Dean Avenue and Depot Street. At the time that this building was constructed, Dean Avenue did not extend to Main Street from Ray Street. That wouldn't happen until the late 1870s. When this building was completed, the post office moved to this building along with the newly created Franklin National Bank. In July of 1874, the town's library books were moved into this building, where they would remain until the late 1880s, when the second Ray Block was completed behind this building. The second Dean Hall. This picture shows the second Dean Hall as it was completed in 1874 on the same footprint as the previous hall. The tower on the top of the building was blown over by the 1938 hurricane and was never replaced. This Dean Hall is still there to this day. The Second Congregational Church. This is the Second Congregational Church, which was built in 1872 on Main Street near High Street, where today's Franklin Federated Church is located. Upon completion of this church, the Catholics took possession of the First Congregational Church, where today's St. Mary's Church is located. The Second Grace Universalist Church. This is the Second Grace Universalist Church, which was built in 1873. It was next to Dean Hall on Main Street and replaced the church that was taken over by the Baptist. It was destroyed by fire in 1886. The O.M. Bassett factory can be seen on the corner of Main Street and School Street. The United Methodist Church. This is the United Methodist Church on West Central Street as it appeared in the early 1900s. The Methodist community began in Franklin in April of 1872 with a pastor, 9 women, and 4 men. In June of 1873, the church was dedicated, and by the end of that year, there were 66 members. In the early 1900s, the memorial stained glass windows were installed, and a few years later, the pipe organ was installed at a cost of $1,500. During the early 1950s, major renovations of the downstairs Sunday school area were completed. In 1995, the church went through significant repairs and renovations in order to prepare itself for a new century of ministry. The United Methodist Church has the distinction of being the only church in Franklin that had been in continuous use by one denomination from the time that it was constructed until the present day. The development of Dean Avenue. In July of 1874, the trustees of Dean Academy auctioned off a large tract of land to individual purchasers. This land was located between Emmons Street and the train depot. The only stipulation was that the purchasers would only be allowed to build homes on that land. New streets would be laid out and finished as required. Emmons Street would be extended to Alpine Street, which was renamed Hillside Road in 1931. In addition, Dean Avenue would be extended to Main Street from Ray Street. This is taken from the 1879 drawing of Franklin, and the arrow shows how Dean Avenue ended at Ray Street. This is taken from the 1888 drawing of the town of Franklin. As the drawing shows, Dean Avenue has now been extended to Main Street from Ray Street, and many new houses have been built in that area. The arrow points to the house at 30 Dean Avenue, which was constructed in 1884 by Francis W. Smith, a local building contractor. In 1894, his widow, Abby, sold the house to Dr. Solon Abbott, a prominent doctor in Franklin. In 1949, Dr. Abbott's family sold it to Mr. and Mrs. Edward F. Landry, my parents, and it would become the home that I grew up in. The Franklin Stock Company. This detail is from the 1884 Sanborn Fire Insurance map. It shows the Franklin Stock Company, a jewelry manufactory that was located on Dean Avenue. Construction for this building began in November of 1883 by Henry R. Jenks, who was the president of the Jewelry Corporation. In August of 1886, the shop was fitted to become a grocery store which was owned by Henry Jenks and Daniel A. Cotton. In August of 1897, Mr. Jenks changed the building over to become a dwelling house. Today, the building is still standing at 29 Dean Avenue. The A. Fletcher Block. The A. Fletcher Block was constructed by Asa Austin Fletcher on Main Street in 1875. It consisted of two separate buildings as shown in this picture. The smaller building was the first one to be constructed, and it was built where the larger one is located. 1 year after it was constructed, the smaller building was moved to the right to an open field, and the larger building was constructed where the smaller one once stood. The small building had 2 stores at street level, while the larger building had 3 stores at street level. In the early 1950s, the smaller building was demolished and replaced with the new Benjamin Franklin Savings Bank building. Eventually, this bank became the Rockland Trust Company, which continues to do business there to this day. The William H. Spear Building. The building on the corner of Cottage Street was constructed by William H. Spear in 1875 as a meat and fish market. The building to the right of that one was constructed by William Enegren and was used as a bakery. The smaller one was constructed in the mid-1890s as a grocery store. These buildings were demolished in the 1980s to make way for the Rome Restaurant, which is still located there today. Daniels Hall. Daniels Hall was constructed on Main Street in 1874 by Joseph H. Daniels. It stood next to the Central House, as shown in the 1884 Sanborn Fire Insurance map. There were stores at street level and a hall on the second floor. It was destroyed by fire in 1886. The Baptist Church. This is the Baptist Church when it was on School Street. It was originally constructed in 1858 as the first Grace Universalist Church on Main Street, across from today's Ray Memorial Library. In March of 1874, the church was sold to Joseph H. Daniels, who had intended to move the church across the street to a site south of the Central House and outfit the building for business purposes. This arrangement upset the Baptist Society as they were trying to secure the church for themselves. But 2 months later, Mr. Daniels agreed to sell the church to the Baptist. Soon after that, the church was moved down School Street to its new location as seen in this picture. The First St. Mary's Catholic Church. This is the First St. Mary's Catholic Church. It was originally built as the first Congregational Church in 1780. In 1874, the Congregationalists turned this church over to the Catholics upon completion of the Second Congregational Church. This church was destroyed by fire in 1900. The Enoch Waite Felting Mill on Depot Street. In October of 1874, Enoch Waite purchased the land at the end of Depot Street, which was located just below the boot manufactory of James M. Freeman, and erected a felting mill as shown by the arrow in the drawing. In April of 1875, he fitted the Freeman building for tenants that would eventually work in his mill. In August of 1876, the mill began operating and would continue in this location until September of 1880, when it was destroyed by fire. the Enoch Waite felting mill on Alpine Place. This 1888 drawing of the town of Franklin shows Waite's felting mill when it was located on Alpine Place. In later years, this mill would become part of American Felt Company. It was destroyed by fire in 1931. The railroad turntable and engine house. In October of 1874, through the generosity of Joseph G. Ray, the New York and New England Railroad was offered a plot of land at the end of Alpine Place where a turntable and engine house could be erected as shown by the arrow. This was done so that the 7:10 a.m. and 11:45 a.m. trains from Franklin to Boston could continue to run during the winter. Otherwise, these trains would have been canceled because at that time the trains had to back up from Walpole to Franklin, and it would have been more difficult to do during the winter months. This is a picture from 1935 that shows the engine house at the end of Alpine Place. The Dr. William B. Nolan Building. In December of 1876, a new building for a physician's office was constructed near Dr. William B. Nolan's drugstore on Main Street, opposite Depot Street. This was on land that was owned by Erastus and Otis Metcalf. This building would eventually be replaced by the Dana Block in the early 1890s. The arrow points to the Nolan Building in this 1888 drawing of the town of Franklin. The Ray Woolen Mill. In 1876, a new woolen mill was erected by Joseph G. Ray and James F. Ray on Union Street near Nason's Crossing. It was a three-set mill of 20 broad looms, the first of its type to be installed in Franklin. In 1899, it was purchased by American Woolen Company. Today, it is a residential complex known as Franklin Landing. The Nason Street School. This is the Nason Street School. The first building was constructed in 1879 and the second building was completed in 1886. Today, a children's playground is located there. The first Sentinel building. In 1878, the Franklin Sentinel began publishing in a building on Dean Avenue. In future years, Peter Pilastri would establish his plumbing business in this building, which is still standing to this day. And this concludes our presentation. Thanks for watching.